Hello everyone and welcome to another Making Meaning lesson. This week we are going to be reading two books. The first one is The Tale of Peter Rabbit by Miss Beatrix Potter. But before we get to that, we have some vocab words. Now, first vocab word is occasionally. Now, occasionally means something that doesn't happen very often, like once in a while. Like you will occasionally see a shooting star. Occasionally. Next one. Encourage. Encourage. Now, encourage means to give someone confidence by helping them or giving them praise. This person's friends are encouraging her to keep running by saying, "Keep going, great job, doing great." They're encouraging her to keep going. Next one. Disapprove. Disapprove. Disapprove means that you don't support something. You don't support the idea, you disagree with it. Could be a synonym for disapprove. Now, I'm going to bring this one back up in a moment because our next word is approve. Approve. Approve means that you support something or you think it is a good idea. Now, I have two words, disapprove and approve. What do you notice about these two words? That's right, the word approve is in both of them. However, disapprove has what we call a prefix. The prefix dis means to not. Disapprove, not approve. It's a fun little prefix in there. All right, so now we're going to get started with The Tale of Peter Rabbit by Miss Beatrix Potter. Now, this book was written over 100 years ago, and it is still in print today. She is both the author and the illustrator, which means she both wrote and drew the pictures. And then, we are going to read a book about Miss Beatrix Potter. Now, this was written by Alexander Wallner, so it is not an autobiography. It was not written by Beatrix Potter, but it is a biography about Beatrix Potter's life. But first, we're going to read a book by Beatrix Potter, and then we're going to do some wondering. For this unit, lesson, you can have a paper, a pencil. I have whiteboards. You can say it out loud, or you can say it to me, say it to a partner. All right, let's get going. The Tale of Peter Rabbit. Now, I'm going to have to scooch in sometime, so bear with me because it's a very small book. The Tale of Peter Rabbit. Once upon a time, there were 4 little rabbits, and their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. They lived with their mother in a sandbank underneath the root of a very big fir tree. "Now, my dears," said old Mrs. Rabbit one morning, "you may go into the fields or down the lane, but don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden." So there's Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Little Peter. "Your father had an accident there. He was put in a pie by Mrs. McGregor." All right, we've come to our first stopping point. So, this week I have whiteboards. So, my question is, what does Miss McGregor mean when she says that their father had an accident? So, you can pause me, or you can say it out loud, or you can write it down. So, what do you think Miss Rabbit means? All right, gotta keep going. Now run along and don't get into mischief. I am going out. Then old Miss Rabbit took a basket and her umbrella and went through the wood to the baker's. She brought, she bought a loaf of brown bread and 5 currant buns. Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail were good little bunnies and went down the lane to gather blackberries. But Peter, who was very naughty, ran straight away to Mr. McGregor's garden. Peter, what did your mom tell you? Second sticky note. And squeezed under the gate. Now, here's my second sticky note. Here's my question. So, what has happened so far, and what do you think will happen next? You can pause me. You can tell me now. What has happened so far, and what will happen next? Peter squeezed right underneath that gate. First he ate some lettuce and some French beans, and then he ate some radishes. And then, feeling rather sick, he went to look for some parsley. But round the end of a cucumber frame, whom should he meet but Mr. McGregor? Mr. McGregor was on his hands and knees planting out young cabbages, but he jumped up and ran after Peter, waving a rake, calling, "Stop, thief!" Peter was most dreadfully frightened. He rushed all over the garden, for he had forgotten the way back to the gate. He had lost one of his shoes among the cabbages. His poor little shoe. And another among the potatoes. After losing them, he ran on 4 legs and went faster. So I think he might have gone away altogether, even not Starting again. After losing them, he ran on 4 legs and went faster. So I think he might have gotten away altogether if he had not unfortunately ran into a gooseberry net and got caught by the large button on his jacket. It was a blue jacket with brass buttons, quite new. Peter gave himself up for lost and shed big tears, but his sobs were overheard by some friendly sparrows, who flew to him in great excitement and implored him to exert himself. So maybe they encouraged him. Mr. McGregor came up with a sieve, which he intended to pop on top of Peter, but Peter wriggled it out just in time, leaving his jacket behind him. And rushed into the tool shed and jumped into a can. It would have been a dreadful thing to hide in if it had not had so much water in it. Oh, excuse me. It would have been a beautiful thing to hide in if it had not had so much water in it. So sorry. Mr. McGregor was quite sure that Peter was somewhere in the tool shed, perhaps hidden underneath a flower pot. He began to turn them over carefully, looking under each. Presently, Peter sneezed. Kerchoo! Mr. McGregor was after him in no time. and tried to put his foot upon Peter, who jumped out of a window, upsetting 3 plants. The window was far too small for Mr. McGregor, and he was tired of running after Peter. He went back to his work. Peter sat down to rest. He was out of breath and trembling with fright, and he had not the least idea which way to go. Also, he was very damp with sitting in that can. After a time, he began to wander about, going lippity-lippity, not very fast, and looking all around. He found a door in a wall, but it was locked, and there was no room for a fat little rabbit to squeeze underneath. An old mouse was running in and out over the stone doorstep, carrying peas and beans to her family in the wood. Peter asked her the way to the gate, but she had such a large pea in her mouth that she could not answer. She only shook her head at him, and Peter began to cry. Then he tried to find his way straight across the garden, but he became more and more puzzled. Presently he came to a pond where Mr. McGregor filled his water cans. A white cat was staring at some goldfish. She sat very, very still, but now and then the tip of her tail twitched as if it were alive. Peter thought it best to go away without speaking to her. He had heard about cats from his cousin, little Benjamin Bunny. He went back towards the tool shed, but suddenly, quite close to him, he heard the noise of a hoe. Scritch, scritch, scratch, scritch. Peter scuttered underneath the bushes. But presently, as nothing happened, he came out and climbed upon a wheelbarrow and peeped over. The first thing he saw was Mr. McGregor hoeing onions. His back was turned towards Peter, and behind him was the gate. Alright, so again, what has happened so far, and what do you think will happen next? You can pause me or answer me now. What has happened so far, and what do you think will happen next? Peter got down very quietly off the wheelbarrow and started running as fast as he could along a straight walk behind some black currant bushes. Mr. McGregor caught sight of him at the corner, but Peter did not care. He slipped underneath the gate and was safe at last in the woods outside the garden. Mr. McGregor hung up the little jacket and the shoes for a scarecrow to frighten the blackbirds. Peter never stopped running or looked behind him till he got home to the big fir tree. He was so tired that he flopped down upon the nice soft sand on the floor of the rabbit hole and shut his eyes. His mother was busy cooking. She wondered what he had done with his clothes. It was the second little jacket and pair of shoes that Peter had lost in a fortnight. Now, a fortnight is 2 weeks. Next sticky note. Alright, so my next question. So I said it was the second little jacket and pair of shoes that Peter had lost in a fortnight. So, from what I just read, about Peter's lost clothes, what can you infer about him? Now remember, we're going to make an inference. An inference is to figure something out about the story that the author did not tell you, but we can use clues from the story to help us. So what can we infer about Peter? I just said that this is the second time he has lost his clothes in a fortnight, so 2 weeks. So what can we guess about Peter? So you can write the sentence or you can say it out loud to me, but I infer that Peter. What guess can you make about Peter and his clothes? And what from the story, what is your story that tells you? So, if I were to make an inference about Peter and his clothes, I would say, I infer that Peter is not responsible. I would infer that Peter is not responsible because, because the text tells me, the author's not telling me, but from the clues from the story, because this is the second time he has lost his clothing. Oh, he has lost his clothes. So, I infer that Peter is not responsible because this is the second time he has lost his clothes. Now, did the author say that he's not responsible? Nope. But I made a good guess based on what I know about Peter and what the text says. The text says that this is the second time he's lost his clothes, and we just read that he lost his clothes. So I'm going to say that Peter's not very responsible. That's my inference about Peter. All right, I'm going to keep going. I am sorry to say that Peter was not very well during the evening. His mother put him to bed and made some chamomile tea, and she gave a dose of it to Peter. 1 tablespoon to be taken at bedtime. But Flopsy, Mopsy, and Contail had bread and milk and blackberries for supper. The end. All right. So, as I said, this book, The Tale of Peter Rabbit, was written by Miss Beatrix Potter. And next, in the next video, we are going to read about Miss Beatrix Potter. Now, this is a biography about Beatrix Potter, but so it was written not by Beatrix Potter, by Alexandra Wallner. So it was not written by Beatrix Potter. That would be an autobiography. That a biography is a story about a person's life. But my last question is, which you can write down or say out loud, what do you wonder? What are some things you wonder about Beatrix Potter? Now, you can write down the sentence starter, I wonder, and answer, what are some things you wonder about Beatrix Potter? Because we're going to read her next. Thanks for listening.